All right, guys, bucket preparation. This is obviously a Lowe's paint bucket. It's best if you get something that's, food approved, but I've kind of just used whatever buckets I can get my hands on that are free. If you guys want to spend money on food approved buckets, I'm not saying that you have to. I honestly don't know. So I just have been using whatever I can get. You'll notice in my tour of the garden video, a lot of them are green, and the green buckets I get from like delis and places like that where they go through a lot of pickles. So those are actually pickle buckets. I think I got them maybe from Chick-fil-A. Firehouse Subs also has buckets. I think they charge you $2 a piece. You know, it's whatever you feel comfortable with. So what you do is, the first thing you do is you take your bucket and you're going to drill holes. So about maybe a little less than half up, okay? And then you're going to drill some down near the base. Now I don't bother drilling holes on the very bottom because when the buckets sit, I put my buckets on tarps. So when they sit on tarps, this creates a seal and it doesn't let anything drain from the very bottom anyway. But if you go right above, you can see there's a little lip. If you go right above this lip right here and just drill some holes, you'll have plenty of drainage. And then I usually do about 8 to 10 holes around the bottom of the bucket. I'll do 3 or 4 on the top and then 3 or 4 on the bottom, you know, whatever I feel comfortable with. Now here's what you do with the buckets is about 1/3 of the way you fill it with sand, okay? Then about a little less. You don't want to go all the way to the top because you want a little reservoir up there, okay? About maybe 2 inches from the top, you fill up to that point with soil. Now I use the cheapest stuff that I can get, which is beginning of the season we get a load of, you'll see the dirt back there, we get a load of it's screeded topsoil, and then all year long we have these buckets which we collect our food waste in, and we create our own compost. But you could buy compost. Now what I usually do is a 50-50 mix. So the top part, I'll put topsoil up, and then I'll put compost on top of that. Then I'll just mix it a little bit. Now if you have a lot of buckets to make up, you can use a wheelbarrow, pre-mix it, and then just dump it in. It really doesn't matter. The most important thing is the sand down the bottom. That 1/3 of a bucket down the bottom needs to be sand or some kind of an aggregate. You could use rocks, pebbles, whatever. And what that does is that gives good drainage. So you got a 2-inch gap on the top, right? And when you fill it up, when you fill your bucket up at night when you water, so you'll fill the bucket up to the top, and as that drains down into the soil, anything that gets too far down will just drain off, so that you don't get root rot. I use sand because I'm really close to the beach and I can drive down and I can get, you know, 4 or 5 buckets of sand and it doesn't cost me anything. But you can also use stones, anything like that. Now I will say this, when you drill the holes, wherever you put this, if you use sand, expect some of that sand to leak out of those holes. It's just the nature of what it is. The good news is that because I get it for free, I just go down to the local beach and grab a few buckets here or there. It doesn't cost anything. But if you use stones, just make sure your holes are smaller than your stones. And you can do any size holes. I use 1/4 inch, but you could do really, you know, whatever size you want. It's going to drain the same. It doesn't really matter. And like I said, you know, I get the buckets, I get them from like Chick-fil-A. Firehouse Subs does sell them. I think they're like $2 a bucket, but they're food quality buckets, which are a little better, I'm told. I don't know how much it really matters. I've never grown like a third arm out of my forehead or anything from using paint buckets, but you know, whatever. I will say this: the only thing I have not been able to grow successfully in buckets is carrots, and I don't know why. Radishes grow great. I did a bunch of those in the beginning of the season. You know, there's not been much that I've had a problem growing in the buckets. We actually did flowers one year too, so the flowers grow great in the buckets. The other tip I will tell you is these buckets are not very pretty. So one of the things you can do is these handles will pop out, and you can get a inexpensive patterned contact paper. I think at the dollar stores they sell it. It's called shelf paper, but it's almost the right width for the bucket. So you can put that on the outside of the buckets if it's up on your deck or patio or something, and you want it to be a little more, you know, stylish about it. But like I said, you know, the holes, just making sure that those holes are poked is the biggest thing for the drainage. So I went over the sand, topsoil, leave 2 inches at the top. That 2 inch, when you start filling these buckets, what happens is the water doesn't soak into the soil as fast as you pour it into the bucket, so it'll sit there for a few minutes, but it'll eventually drain down so that it's in the soil. That's why you need that top 2 inches, because it's kind of like a reservoir, if you will. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask. I will give you one other glimmer of information that I've kind of found myself, which is a lot of people tell you to put something on the top to stop the weeds. The fact that this bucket is so high off the ground, when we're mowing, the weed seed doesn't really go into it, and once the plants start, they kind of fill the bucket, so it's even less weed seed that gets in there, so it's less chance of having to weed at all. So like I said, this season I've got almost I think 60 buckets, something like that, and between all of my buckets I've only had to pull like 4 or 5 weeds, and I'm not saying 4 or 5 times, I'm saying 4 or 5 actual weeds out of the buckets. It's just a really great way to do low maintenance gardening. It's not very pretty, but it is extremely effective. And the other good thing too is that because your soil is in the bucket, you can keep the moisture level in the soil to what you want it. When we had some really hot spells and people were losing tomato plants left and right, I was able to water twice a day and keep the moisture in the soil, which kept my tomato plants alive. If you guys have any other questions, if you want to come to my house and check this out, feel free to message me. I'm always interested in sharing information, so if you got something that you use in your raised beds that you find is extremely helpful, because buckets are really just that, they're a really small raised bed, feel free to let me know. Next year we're going to work on a drip irrigation system for the buckets that I've seen some people use, so we'll have some updates on that too. Alright guys, again, feel free to message me with any questions. I'll answer them as fast as I possibly can, and I hope you guys have a great day.